It is my pleasure to now introduce Dr. Risher, Dr. Sharon Risher, the Reverend. Reverend Sharon Risher is a minister, a mother, daughter, activist, and author. Reverend Risher is a volunteer for Moms Demand Action, a member of Everytown Survivor Network, and a board member for the Everytown Interfaith Advisory Council. On June 17, 2015, Reverend Risher learned that her mother, Mrs. Ethel Lee Lance, was killed in Charleston, South Carolina, at the Mother Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church, along with 8 others. Of those 8, 2 included her cousins, as well as a childhood friend. Reverend Risher's story is one of transformation, from an anonymous hospital chaplain to one who was thrusted into the national spotlight and who joined other survivors of gun violence-related horrors. Reverend Risher is now an outspoken advocate on this nation's gun laws, recounting her grief and her struggles while sharing her faith and a renewed purpose. Please join me in welcoming Reverend Sharon Risher.
Good morning, good morning. I welcome you to this opening session of the White Supremacy and Firearms Symposium. I have a great fortune, great responsibility, and burden to talk about the intersectionality, white supremacy, and how guns have affected and impacted my life. And specifically, I have to begin by saying that this morning my soul is heavy. And it's heavy because the remnants and the ripple effects of white supremacy and gun violence continues to ripple through time. I kept in touch. I met one of the survivors from the El Paso Walmart shooting. We did a segment together for CBS for DLT. And we have kept in touch ever since then. Yesterday, the El Paso families had to go to court and listen to this young fellow plead guilty to 90 counts of hate crime. I'm not sure what side of the aisle my friend Stephanie is on, whether she wanted the death penalty or not. I understand exactly what she went through. When I asked her how she was doing, she said she wanted to throw up. So, when we want to talk about white supremacy and how it impacts your life, for me, ever since what happened to my mother in the church in Charleston, my life and my family's life is never, ever going to be the same. But see, the thing with me is white supremacy has been a part of my Black history, my life, my whole life. Because no matter what, I'm a proud daughter of the American South, a true low-country girl, raised in the place where slaves were brought to be sold and walk those streets as a young girl. White supremacy has always been a part of my history. It's not a new phenomenon. You see, this daily connection between white supremacy and guns run throughout. Look at American history. There is so much I could say, but we know that prominent people are gunned down with a gun because of white supremacy. We could, so many I could talk about, but what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma? What happened to Emmett Till? What happened in that church in Charleston, the grocery store, the Buffalo, homes I could go on, and then here lately we talk about supremacy, and we have to acknowledge what supremacy did to Tyrese Nichols. This morning, I want to highlight the human consequences of how gun violence affect people and how survivors must navigate through these three things. I believe that are the major challenges in order to survive and to order to regain some kind of new normal, some kind of going forward, some kind of renewing of a purpose. Like in my case, there was a renewed purpose in my life that I never knew that that's what I was supposed to be doing. So I will talk about understanding the devastation to families. Second, trauma to survivors never stop. And lastly, active community support. We know, we've heard the narrative, the story of what happened in that church, but do people really know what happened that night, that hot summer June night, that it was hundreds of people in that church earlier for a meeting of the district of the AME church? The meeting had run over time, and Myra that was killed along with my mother had just gotten licensed as a minister. And they had talked about canceling the Bible study, but that would have been Myra's first time. And she was eager, she was well prepared. Those people that stayed were staunch Myra supporters, so they said, no, we're not going to cancel. Dylan Roof came into the church, and because Emanuel is on a main thoroughfare in the heart of downtown Charleston, it's not surprising that a white person would wander through and come into the church. So they welcomed him in, and he could be seated in the church, and they did that. They started her Bible study that came out of the Gospel of Mark, chapter 4, the parable of the sower. They sat him down, and he stayed through an hour of this Bible study, talking about the good soil and the seeds that you sow. And while they were ready to be dispersed, they got in, stood up, got in the circle, head bowed, eyes closed, and Dylan Roof pulled out his Glock 45 and slaughtered them like they were animals. Nobody knows that my mother's cell phone fell out of her pocket. That cell phone was the phone that Miss Polly used. It was a survivor to call. This is what white supremacy looks like with the gun. There's an old African saying that as long as you call their names, they are never dead. So I continue to call their names. So bear with me while I call their names. My mother, Mrs. Ethel Lee Lance. My two cousins, Mrs. Susie Jackson and Alonzo Sanders. My childhood friend, Robert Thompson, pastor of the church, Reverend Clemente Payne, Simmons, Reverend Sharon Coleman, Mrs. Cynthia Hurd, Reverend Payne Middleton. My family had to sit through a trial, just like my friend has done in El Paso. He was found guilty on 33 counts of a hate crime, obstruction of religious exercise, and firearm charges for killing and attempting to kill. On On June 10th, 2016, he was sentenced to death by the federal government, state of South Carolina, and he sits now on death row in federal prison in Indiana. And here, all of these things continue to be a part of the devastation because God working with me and in my faith, I have come to forgive Dylan Roof. I have come to be the chairman of the board for the Death Penalty Action Group, which our main goal is to abolish the death penalty. And this little white young supremacist decided that he needed to be the one. He goes with pictures with the Confederate flag, sometimes even slinging it over his shoulders. And we can make a connection now to what happened in the Capitol on January the 6th, 2020. Similarities between these 2 days don't. Both of those days ended in death, but both attacks were perpetrated mostly by white supremacists chasing a lost cause, causing killing. Others killers were armed with a handgun. People that invaded the Capitol, enough live ammunition to shoot every member of the House. My story, my example, one thing that came out of that is that Confederate flag that flew over the state of South Carolina was finally taken down a month later. So simply put, if that Confederate flag is the primary symbol of white supremacist hate, then the gun, its deadliest weapon. Okay, let me try to just give you some examples of the devastation that family members go through. Because you see, we go through a spiritual, emotional, and then we go through financial issues because of what has happened in our lives. For my family, at the very beginning, issues started to come up. We didn't know how to handle such a tragic event and found ourselves yelling. It was 4 of us that was still alive at that time. We could not come together to make decisions, and decisions had to be made when our minds were foggy. And I was one that came from Dallas, Texas, because I didn't live in Charleston. So there was some resentment against me for coming in and being the oldest and wanting to have my say so. Family were split apart. We really were. There have been 2 siblings of mine that have died since that time, and they were the 2 that my mother supported with every fiber of her being, financially, emotionally, spiritually. And then I was just left my baby sister, who I must admit that it's been 7 years and we have finally found a place to come back together as sisters. This is what the devastation of white supremacy and gun does to families. It tears family apart. And at that time, we had the media clamoring to get interviews, and here we are, a group of 4 people lost and confused, fighting with one another, trying to make funeral arrangements while our minds were confused. And then we talk about spiritual devastation. And even though I am an ordained minister, I must admit that I went through a period of a self-imposed exile, being angry with God. The one thing that had kept me going. The call to ministry, knowing God was the thing that I knew. But when my mother got killed, I was there to support God. I didn't want to read a Bible. I didn't want to hear a gospel song. All of the things that fed my life didn't want. And then it started to be, then I got hypervigilant about the Bible and praying and asking God to please help me. It took at least 2 years for me to go through that process, bringing myself back to a place of worship, a place of needing to be in fellowship and community with other people. Going through what I've gone through because of white supremacy leaves you with complicated grief. The grief that a person has gone through, from what I've gone through, there will always be that trauma. And in some psychological circles, they call it complicated grief. I'm glad that I was able to find the peace that I needed to go back. That peace I know that only God could give me, of acceptance and peace. And see, then you go through the emotional, and all you want is vengeance and anger and the rage. You wake up, that's all you can think about in the beginning. And anger and rage eats at you. I lost about 45 pounds in about 6 months. Couldn't eat. I had to get medication to help me sleep. The anger comes through when people are really trying to be supportive, and maybe sometimes they say the wrong thing, but Lord knows you have to give them some grace because they really don't know what to say or how to say it. And it takes everything in you to not want to scream and holler and tell them it's really what's on your mind. And then we get to the financial part, because you see, that was one thing about my mom. She believed in life insurance, let me tell you. But she had always said, I'm going to leave enough money for y'all to bear me the way I want, and for each one of you to get a little piece of money in your hand. This is what I'm going to do. So, in making funeral arrangements, we were going off the premise of what we had with my mother's life insurance policy. And we got down who was the beneficiary, and here goes another thing. Charleston did jump in and refunded the money for the funeral expenses and everything. But at that time, we had to plan a funeral with the resources we had, and we were lucky. And some people don't have those kind of resources. Think about, people in Buffalo, El Paso, and the sheep, all these different groups of people. When these things happen, you have to, there's a financial strain that happens, and you wonder. Some people have to move to their homes because they can't stay there. Me, I left a job, my dream job as a trauma chaplain in Dallas, because I couldn't do my job anymore. That was my only income, but I knew that I could not be an effective chaplain in the emotional state that I found myself in when I did try to go back to work. The second part of this trauma to survivors never stop, because it never stops. It's a lifelong PTSD that you learn to live with. Many days it's an emotional roller coaster. Days and birthdays and special, all these things still continue to come up. your first thought is of that loved one that's not here because the person's so hateful, the gun decided to kill them. So you have all of these life events that continue to go in your memories of wanting that loved one to be there so they never far away. It's breaking news. For me, when I see the breaking news, I start to pray, Lord, please. You don't know what you're going to hear on the news. There have been so many mass hate crime shootings. And for me, I carry each one of these things in my heart. And it's a burden to carry that. Severe anxiety. Sometimes you don't remember how it feels just to be able to breathe and take a day because there is always something that throws you back. And for me, because I've worked with so many of the survivors of these major mass shootings, begun to know people personally. We never get away. Every time there is a mass shooting and considered a hate crime, I'm going to get a call from a reporter. Someone's going to ask me my opinion. How I feel is terrible because I know what these families are going to go through. I know. Every time something happened, wherever I am, my whole body have this aching, thinking feeling. So you never really get away from it. It's always there, always there. It's the last part of the whole community support. The community has to be able to come up because you see the community too is affected. The community of Charleston was affected. The church was affected. Everywhere these things happen because of white supremacy. A whole community is thrust into fear and confusion. The community needs to be able to support with victim assistance and make that process more streamlined. Because now victims have to be able to go through all this red tape. And then you have people who are doing these jobs to be more sensitive. Survivors are going through horrific things, and now they have to think about funerals and all of that. And now the state is asking you to fill out all of this paperwork, so hopefully you can get a designated little bit of money. The community has to be able to supply mental health care, not for a little while, but forever. Because as long as a person lives who's a survivor, they will need mental health. It took me 2 years to finally admit that I needed to talk to someone. People like me sometimes think we could do it on our own because we have a special connection to God, but it doesn't work like that. I want to say, in conclusion, supremacy, the intersectionality of this with guns affects people for the rest of their lives. And you know what? It's not survivors, but everyday people, people that have a heart, people that know that if we could love one another, things could be better. Electricity work with Moms Demand in every town that led me to be able to talk across this country. I just left New York with a conference on faith leaders and gun violence. The faith community has to step up and be there for people because we understand it's not going to stop. I'm hoping the work that I do in being an advocate for gun violence reform and being an advocate for the death penalty, and that's a whole other ball game, that we will help one person, two-person, that white supremacy is no good for anybody. It's been 400 years since the slaves were brought to America, and we're still dealing with supremacy. Now we have blue supremacy, but it's all about superiority. So I hope that you have heard something this morning that will stir your heart, something that will have drawn your attention. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time out to listen to me. God bless you each and everyone. Thank you.
So compelling and heartwarming, and yet so difficult to hear your recounts. I will just share that it was a little bit difficult to hear your full presentation, but I heard and I understood and I saw the emotion, and I so very much appreciate all of the different lenses by which you help us understand the personal impact, the community impact, the continual trauma, the financial consequences as well, the things that we don't necessarily always think about when faced with these issues or when understanding the impacts of white supremacist violence in our communities. And I so appreciate your lifting and raising and helping us understand all of the different levers. Janelle, I know, has very specific questions for you. And so thank you again for sharing your story, for walking us through and helping us to understand all of the different dimensions of what happens when we are now, as yourself, thrusted into a space of being a survivor and needing to think about community impacts. I think it was very difficult when you shared as a chaplain that not even being able to now continue that work, and that's difficult to hear and to understand, recognizing your very special relationship to God, and the way He's holding you and keeping you in these very difficult moments. And so I turn to you, Janelle, for your specific questions for our Reverend.
Thank you, Reverend Risher. I echo Michelle's sentiments, and I appreciate you being here today and just being willing to share your story with us. I know that it's not easy to recount and relive these experiences, so I just want to name that. This was an unspeakable and traumatic event that your family and your community went through. How is the church doing today?
Well, I could say that the church has been trying to regain the thriving atmosphere that Emanuel once was. A lot of people left the church. The church is old, needs a lot of money. They are right now repairing. I think this pipe organ is more than 200 years old that they're trying to restore. So the church is trying to get back. I don't know if it'll ever be the same. I tell you, sometimes I could go in that church and I feel good, and then other times I can't. But that church has survived so many things, so it'll continue to be.
Yeah, it sounds like this experience has really created a ripple effect in the church and the community. And I think it's important for people to understand that time doesn't necessarily make these pains go away from these experiences. And like you said, not knowing whether it's going to go back to what it was after experiencing these types of events, we have to learn to live with them in our narrative and adjust to our new normal. What has been most seminal to you and your church's healing?
Okay, so with Emanuel, I grew up in Emanuel for about 2 years until I went to college. My mother joined that church I was a sophomore. And so I really haven't had like a long tie to the church, but my own faith, I was part of a AME congregation in Dallas where I served as an associate minister. So my faith has definitely been a major catalyst in any kind of healing other than that time that I just stayed away from church. I did not want to be a part of anything that had to do with God because I was not liking God. at that time. But without it, I don't know if I could have started to do the work that I'm doing now without my faith.
That's such an interesting dialectic that happens, how faith can really anchor us and ground us and give us the strength to carry on in the face of these types of experiences, but also being angry at God about these things happening. You've been outspoken about your desire to forgive the killer. What has that journey been like for you, and where are you at with that today?
Well, actually, um, it was in October of 2017 when I was invited to preach at a World Communion Sunday in Virginia. And God had been working with my heart, and there was a lot of questioning myself. And actually, when I was preaching, words, I forgive you, Dylan Roof, came out my mouth, and was floored because first of all, I'm trying to figure out what's going on with my sermon. I'm trying to look down at the paper and my eyes is welled up with tears and I can't see and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And then I knew then that all of the praying, all of the asking God, how can I forgive this man? The families who had attended the arraignment, which I hadn't gotten into Charleston yet, had forgiven him. And from talking to those people, they had no idea that they would do that day. They felt like they would just keep their mouths shut. But okay, so for people like me who believe, God said, no, I need y'all to be a catalyst to let people know that even through this horrific thing, that there is a place of forgiveness, because we all know that forgiveness is not just for the perpetrator. Forgiveness is for you to try to find a place of being free of carrying that burden, because that burden brings you down. So that forgiveness, it takes work. It's just not, some people believe that it's instant. I don't, but I don't begrudge anybody that can instantly forgive somebody either. I just know for me that it was definitely a process. And when I had to look at Dylan Roof as a person, then my faith tells me that every person is worthy. So that's how I was able to get to that with him, because I had to start to look at him as a human being and not as a monster that killed my mother.
It sounds like quite a journey, and you're right. Forgiveness looks different for each of us. So thank you for naming that. I can only imagine how impactful, but albeit emotionally taxing, this work must be for you. In the gun violence prevention space, we have many wins and we have many lows too. How do you stay focused and keep your motivation for engaging in this work with how emotionally taxing it is?
Well, I tell you what, it's hard. It really is. And there are many days that you feel like no matter what you do, it's just like, when is this going to stop? And then there are those days when the motivation comes from, even though change is slow, there is change. I was invited to the White House this past summer in July to see Biden sign executive orders, changes that had been more than 40 years or so. And so those are the kind of days that give you hope, when I'm able to speak to a group of middle schoolers or college kids, and they want to know more. They want to know how they can get involved. Those are the times that keep me going. And then, of course, I have my family. I have two young little grandbabies. You know, my kids waited till I'm almost 65 years old to introduce grandbabies, but I'm ecstatic. And one of them, he's running around, and so, and You can see from my plant, that plant came from a fifth remembrance of mama, and I've grown this plant. So growing things gives me life when I see new life. So it's just a mixture, and you have to just accept whatever comes, whatever the day is. When you get up and you start your day, you know what kind of day it's going to be. So
Family is so important in general, and especially in getting through these types of experiences. I see the joy on your face when you talk about your grandkids, and I can only imagine how wonderful it is for you to be able to be a grandmother. I'm an aunt
yes,
myself, and it's
yeah,
one of,
I'm Gigi. Yeah, my grandma's name is Gigi, so I'm Gigi.
I love that, Gigi. Tell us a little bit about your family. What was it like for you all navigating this? I know that sometimes these kinds of tragedies really place strain on families. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, in the beginning, there were four living siblings from my mom's. We had a sister Terry that died in 2013. My mama nursed her and had to bury her daughter through cancer. So there were three girls, and my brother was the only guy. And my brother was deaf, so there were special circumstances in communicating with him and all of that. But we were thrust into something we just didn't even know how to handle. There was a split in siblings and trying to make decisions about what would happen and how we would bury mama and who had control of everything. It was awful. They say let the craziness come out of person when you have to deal with the death of a mother or father, and siblings have to come together, and they're all the personalities, and definitely that's what happened to us. And there was a big rift that never really was resolved. My baby sister, there's only two of us now because a sister and a brother died since my mother. That was hard. They didn't have insurance, trying to bury a lot for me and my family, just so much, just so much hurt feelings. And finally, my baby sister and myself, after 7 years of being estranged from each other, we are finally getting to a point where we're talking to each other. I don't know if we'll ever get to the point where we'll really discuss what happened. But sometimes you just got to go on and just let things be the way they are. But I'm glad to have my sister back in my life because she's the only connection I have to my mother, to be able to talk about her with someone that knows exactly what I'm talking about. Without my kids, I don't know how I would have made it. That was the reason I moved from Dallas back to North Carolina, because they were like, "Ma, you have to come home." And then at that time, I was so focused on my own thing, I didn't realize what my own kids were going through. And after a while, they were really able to tell me how single focused I was and how I didn't even think about them. And that made me feel so bad. But at that time, I was doing the best I can to not just fall apart, thinking that with me being the oldest, that I have to be the matriarch that my mother was. And maybe I wasn't supposed to be the matriarch, but in my mind, I was supposed to be. And maybe that's why I had the pushback from my siblings. Maybe they didn't want me to be the matriarch, but I felt my mother wanted me to be. So, anyway.
Just an experience of unimaginable grief in your life for you and your family, and I'm so sorry to hear about the discord that happened between you and your siblings, but I'm really happy to hear that you and your sister have reconnected and are
Yeah.
able to try to repair that relationship. And you're right, when these things happen, we are doing the best that we can. And thank you just for sharing this experience with us and just being so vulnerable with us about this. So we often hear from survivors that there's not enough support in the aftermath of shootings. Were there any organizations that assisted you? And what additional support would you like to see for victims and survivors?
Well, one of the things is South Carolina was offering support, but I lived in North Carolina. So that made the transition for me hard to be able to get resources from South Carolina. But as a general community support, um, the filling out of all of the paperwork that has to be completed when your mind is in a fog. You have to try to figure out, navigate the paperwork. The people you that doing it is doing the best they can, but there's a sensitivity that comes with trying to navigate all of that. And sometimes people will have to move. So the community should be able to help a person relocate in housing if they need to. I talked with, while I was in New York, one survivor said to me that her son was killed in her apartment, and she was promised a new apartment and she's still living there. Can you imagine living in the apartment where your son was killed? So we need a more sensitivity in handling survivors. There's need to be a separation of how you handle things, and then the mental health part of it. Uh, Counseling has to be offered, I think, for a person the rest of their lives. There can't be a time limit on that, and to make um, that mental health available, not leaving it to you to try to pick somebody because you don't know how to pick. And then is this person um specialized in dealing with trauma? And so the navigating of finding the right person and being able to really talk to someone, you know the community with grief support, for active people that have gone through gun violence, and not putting you with a grief support group where it's just grief. So it's a lot of nuances. And that's the thing about the community. The community have to fill in the nuances of things, and to make that available long term.
Yeah, you've provided a lot of insights about the aftermath, what comes after, and what goes into healing and supporting survivors in a community that has just experienced an unspeakable tragedy. And it really shines light on how some of these systems intended to help can compound the trauma that you all have just experienced. You've been doing gun violence prevention advocacy work for a decade now. Can you share some of that work with us?
Well, like I said, with Moms Demand Action, uh, I didn't even know such thing existed. And then I connected with Lucy McBath, who is now Congresswoman for the 6th District out of Georgia. And she was working with Moms Demand Action as a survivor lead. And I had gotten a packet of letters from the church once I got back to Dallas, and a particular envelope caught my eye because of the writing. Well, it was Lucy McBath, and she told me the story about her son getting killed in Jacksonville, Florida, and how she'd been working with this grassroots organization. And if I felt like I needed to talk to someone or whatever, I could call her. She gave me her telephone number. I did call her, And let's see, Mama got killed in June, and I think that September, I was invited to a rally that was being held in Washington, D.C. And Chuck Schumer and all these big people were there, and I was asked to speak. And being up there, being afraid, being nervous, there was something in me that said, this is what I need to be doing. And so with that work, that kind of propelled me into that national thing of speaking about Charleston and what happened and trying to get gun laws changed, because we know with Dylan Roof, it could have been, maybe, we don't know. He would have never been able to buy his gun, because now, you see, this is the thing, after you've been through something, I don't know, maybe this is just the Jesus in me. I think about Dylan Roof at least tried to get his gun legally. You know what I mean? He went to go get buy the gun. They did the background check. They didn't do it right. If they had did it right, they would have found that he had a charge that forfeited his right to buy a gun, you know? And so that came up with the bill from Jim Clyburn and some other people called the Charleston loophole. The Charleston loophole, I've been advocating about that, and it's been sitting. It passed through the House of Representatives, but it never went through Congress. But the Charleston loophole extends the time the background check could be made to make sure that if the person is legally able to get a gun, they can get it. And if not, then they won't. And of course, you know, people make a big deal about the Second Amendment. And I believe people have the right to buy things legally, but just let it be easy. You know, the red flag laws and domestic violence, though the ERPL law about being able to take someone's guns away if they've had a history of domestic violence, because we know more women than not are killed by a firearm through domestic violence. So it's just, oh man. Ooh, yeah,
Yeah.
so um, the work is hard. The changes is slow, but I know that this is the work that I'm supposed to be doing. Um, Everytown and Moms Demand Action did give me a national platform that I could not have gotten anywhere else. And so I continue to be a voice and to participate as much as I can, because if there's one person that can be saved, then that's what we want to do. And you know, of course, the power of the vote. We have to vote legislators in that believe in gun law reform, that really believe in this. It's not an issue that's going to go away. And then, of course, because of what we're doing today, you put that with, you know, white supremacy. We have to do something about disbanding these groups that are so vocal in their hatred. We have to do something about that.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And voting is important. If our votes weren't important, they wouldn't be trying so hard to keep us from exercising our
Exactly.
constitutional right. Thank you for
Yes.
your voice in this space. And, you know, as you're talking and sharing your experience, it occurs to me that clergy can find themselves in this dual role, especially with these attacks on our places of worship, of that themselves being victimized by gun violence and also being in a position to support survivors of gun violence. So is there some sort of support organization for clergy who have been affected by gun violence, and how can clergy take care of themselves in the midst of these tragedies?
Well, you know, most local community have a local clergy coalition. There is a group of people here in Charlotte that I've connected with. But you know, that's a good question. And that was some of the things that we talked about in this conference that I attended in New York this past Monday. How, okay, you're in ministry, yeah, but a lot of times you're confronted with things you have no idea about. So it's hard to really minister to a person in your congregation or your community when you have no context. I mean, yes, you could pray with a person, but it takes I think just a special understanding and sensitivity to deal with people that have gone through such tragic events like gun violence. So my thing too is pastors need to have more specialized training. You know, we can't continue to live on our laurels from what we've learned through seminary or what education you have. That we really have to get involved with the community and see what's out there. In New York, they have a group called the God Squad. The state of New York and the city of New York has given this nonprofit group the money to be able to have a crisis response team that's dispatched when there's gun violence in the community, and clergy is dispatched to go out there to help uh, navigate them through going to the hospital, being a presence, the ministry of presence. So I was really struck by that, and so we clergy have to continue to be sensitive to what's going on in the community. We can't continue to sit in the church. Um, and yet still we have to be able, I call it, instead of self-care, soul care, because it's your souls you're dealing with, you're dealing with people's souls. So we have to be able to do what makes us happy. I'm a gospel music person. I love music. I like to dance. I like to, so when I get a chance to do what I want, I do what I want. But it's hard. It's a hard role to take. I don't have a church. That was not my calling. I was always once a chaplain, always a chaplain. But I do get asked to be a guest preacher and all. So that's my take on that. Yeah.
Thank you. What would you say to someone who is interested in becoming involved in advocacy and is just finding their voice?
Okay. So I know that if you text 64433, that will get you in touch with the Moms Demand Action team. They will respond. They will find out where you are. There are chapters in most major cities. Of course, with the internet, you can Google Moms Demand Action for people that have had gun violence in their lives. And a survivor is a person that's been affected by a gun. You don't have to have been hurt by a gun, but it could be your cousin, your mama, your girlfriend, your next door neighbor. If it has caused you some kind of stress, then you're considered a survivor. And the same thing, they could connect you. You could Google Everytown for Gun Sense Survivor Network and get in touch with them, and someone will get back with you. And so it's real easy. It's real easy to find out about ways to get involved in advocacy work. But if you text 64433, you will definitely get a response.
Thank you for sharing those resources, and I really appreciate you naming the levels of harm that come with this, that you don't have to be the one who was injured by firearm violence to be considered a survivor. There are emotional and psychological and spiritual harms that come with this type of
Yes,
violence. And I'm hoping and I suspect that you naming that has allowed someone listening today to recognize they're a survivor and they're worthy of support to navigate what
yes.
they've experienced. So, Reverend Risher, it's been lovely talking to you. Um, how can people keep up with you and the work that you're doing?
Well, so my website is www.sharonrisherspeaks.com. I'm on Facebook under Sharon Risher. I'm on Twitter under Rish Rev. And like everybody else, you can Google. You can Google my name. Of course, I'm going to plug my book. I wrote a book that came out 4 years after. for such a time as this, Hope and Forgiveness After the Charleston Massacre. And it's on all the major book sites, Amazon and Barnes and Nobles. So I'm out there. Yes, you could find me. I have been so humbled to be a part of this. I'm sorry if my AirPods didn't do what it needed to do. Please allow me some grace with that. But I thank Johns Hopkins for putting together this most important symposium, and God's grace on the people that will come behind me in their presentation.
What a wonderful presentation, Reverend Risher. And yes, all of the grace to you and just the utmost gratitude and appreciation for you spending your morning with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.